Hello, today's lesson is going to be a little bit about photography and one of its most important components, which is aperture. I think most people understand how to take a photo. You can throw a camera into automatic and it will do all of the work for you and it will produce phenomenal images. However, if you want to learn more about photography and you want to make it your own and be creative and understand really how camera works and how artists have worked through photography, it's extremely important for you to know three main components, which are aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. Those are really, it's the triangle of photography that makes it all work. And different cameras have different technologies, but every camera will have those three components. So today we're just going to focus on aperture and how it affects a camera and what it does for you. So just to start out, I'm just going to show you an example of how aperture works on an older lens. So right now, my aperture on this lens is at f23. So aperture is referred to f-stops. So you'll hear f23 or f2.8 and numbers in between. So right now, it's at f23, and you can barely see that little spot right there. And now, if I move it over to f2.8, you can see what a difference that makes. So now it's wide open, and when I move it over again, it's little. So at its smallest point, it is at f22, which is the largest number. And at its biggest point, it is at f2.8, which is the smallest number. So that is probably the most confusing part about aperture. And really what aperture does for you is it affects your depth of field. So with a very wide aperture, which is the smallest number, so for example, a 2.8 aperture, it'll look like this, very wide. In a 2.8 aperture, you'll see an image like this. I am not a drawer, I am a photographer, so I apologize for the drawing. But if you have an f2.8 aperture, which is at its widest, you will get a very narrow depth of field. So you will really just have this little guy in focus. However, if you moved to, say, an f22 aperture, which I'll show again on here, which is like, so this would be an f22 aperture, then you would get both the guy and the tree in focus. So I'm going to repeat that. In this image, all you would have in focus is this guy, and that is at an f2.8 aperture. And really everything around it would be blurred out. However, in an f22 aperture, you would get all of this involved. So really, understanding aperture allows you to manipulate and be creative with your photography. So for example, if you were taking portraiture, you would want a narrow depth of field because you would want just the person to be in focus. So you would want the widest aperture, so f2.8, and you would take the image and you would create a very clear image of the person and blurred out background. However, if you were wanting to take a beautiful landscape photo, you would want a smaller aperture, so you'd want, say, f16 or f22, so that everything is in focus, so you're not missing any detail in the landscape. These are just really important things to know in photography, and if you want to grow in that, you can learn more about this. And just to exemplify how important aperture really is, if you look at lenses to purchase for a camera, prices will skyrocket if you see an f2.8 lens, which is its widest aperture, which is a narrow depth of field, or you can get an f1.4 lens, which creates so much more clarity because of how narrow the depth of field is. It's about a $700, $800 difference in that lens. So I'm hoping you now understand a little more about aperture and like how it works and how you can manipulate it. And next time we will talk about shutter speed and ISO to clarify how those all work together. Thank you.